Police cruisers lined the entrance to the luxury marina before sunrise. Red and blue lights reflected across what should have been deep water. Instead, hundreds of feet of cracked mud stretched beneath expensive docks that now hung crooked in the air. Million-dollar boats leaned helplessly against their slips while homeowners gathered in stunned silence. HOA President Victoria Langford pushed past the crowd, her designer heels sinking into the wet ground. "What happened to the lake?" she shouted. No one answered. County engineers stood near an old concrete control structure, quietly examining rusted steel gates that had not been opened in decades. Officer Rebecca Morales looked from the empty lakebed to a calm, gray-haired man standing beside his attorney. "Mr. Carter," she asked, "did you authorize this?" David Carter didn't smile. "I exercised a legal property right that has existed longer than this neighborhood." Victoria pointed at him with shaking hands. "You destroyed $5 million worth of community property." Attorney Michael Bennett calmly stepped forward and handed Officer Morales a thick folder. "It wasn't community property," he said. "And by the time you finish reading those documents, you'll understand why." Across the crowd, several HOA board members exchanged nervous glances. One quietly lowered his head, as if he already knew something the others didn't. What nobody realized was that the empty lake was only the beginning. Before the day ended, hidden documents, forgotten property records, and one decision made decades earlier would threaten to destroy the HOA itself. If you enjoy stories where justice always wins, subscribe, and let's begin. 2 days earlier, David Carter loved quiet mornings. After 24 years in the Marine Corps, peace had become something he valued more than anything money could buy. Every sunrise found him standing on the wooden dock behind the lake house his grandfather had built nearly 60 years earlier. His wife, Sarah, carried 2 mugs of coffee onto the porch. "Fish jumping already?" she asked with a smile. David nodded. "They always know when it's going to be a beautiful day." For years, the private lake had been the heart of their lives. Their children had learned to swim there. Their grandchildren spent every summer fishing from the old dock. Every memory seemed tied to the water stretching beyond their backyard. Then the silence disappeared. Heavy construction equipment rolled down the private access road. Bulldozers, concrete trucks, survey crews. David frowned. "That doesn't look like maintenance." Within minutes, workers began placing bright orange stakes along the shoreline, on land David knew belonged to his family. He walked toward the foreman. "Morning," David said calmly. "Can I ask what you're building?" The foreman glanced at a clipboard. "Luxury Marina project." David blinked. "I think you got the wrong property." The man hesitated. "We're following HOA-approved plans." David looked toward the lake. Spray paint marks now covered several trees near his dock. His stomach tightened. "I'm telling you," he said, "this lake isn't HOA property." The foreman lowered his voice. "Sir, I don't make those decisions." Before David could ask another question, a black luxury SUV pulled onto the construction site. Victoria Langford stepped out wearing a crisp white blazer and sunglasses. She smiled as if everything were perfectly normal. "Good morning, David," she called. "Beautiful day for progress, isn't it?" David folded his arms. "Progress on my property?" Victoria removed her sunglasses. "Our property," she corrected. For the first time in years, David felt the calm he had carried since leaving the Marines began to crack. And neither of them realized that a single sentence spoken in the next few minutes would eventually decide the entire case. Victoria stepped closer, keeping the confident smile she used at every HOA meeting. "You received the community expansion notice," she said. "The board approved construction months ago." David shook his head. "I never received anything, and even if I had, the HOA can't approve work on land it doesn't own." A few construction workers stopped what they were doing. They could sense the conversation was becoming more serious. Victoria crossed her arms. "Our attorneys reviewed everything. The marina will increase property values for the entire neighborhood. You should be thanking the board." David looked toward the survey stakes driven into his shoreline. "My grandfather bought this lake long before this subdivision existed. I have every deed." Victoria's smile faded for just a second. Then I'm sure you won't mind letting our lawyers review them. Before David could answer, the sound of a chainsaw echoed across the water. He turned around just in time to see a large oak tree, planted by his grandfather decades earlier, begin to fall. "Stop!" David shouted as he ran toward the workers. The tree crashed to the ground, shaking the shoreline. Sarah hurried over from the house, horrified. "That tree had been here longer than any of these homes," she said quietly. The foreman removed his hard hat. "I'm sorry, sir. These were the marked construction limits." David took a slow breath, forcing himself to stay calm. "Who marked them?" The foreman hesitated before looking toward Victoria. She answered for him. "The HOA engineering plans." David stared at the fresh stump. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. Someone had decided his property belonged to someone else. That afternoon, David walked into the county records office carrying a worn leather folder that had belonged to his grandfather. A clerk carefully unfolded several aging documents. "These are original property records," she said. "Some date back more than 60 years. David watched as she compared them with newer digital maps. After several minutes, her expression changed. "That's strange." "What is it?" David asked. "The modern subdivision map doesn't completely match these original surveys." David felt his pulse quicken. "Can you print both versions?" "Of course." As the printer hummed, the clerk leaned closer. "You didn't hear this from me, but I'd have an independent survey completed." "Why?" She lowered her voice. "Because if these originals are correct, someone changed more than a property line." The following morning, David hired a licensed surveyor. By noon, bright survey flags stretched around the shoreline. Neighbors gathered on the sidewalk, whispering among themselves. Some believed David was simply trying to stop progress. Others weren't so sure. Late that afternoon, the surveyor walked back carrying a tablet and several maps. "I've checked the GPS coordinates 3 different ways," he said. "And? The legal shoreline matches your grandfather's deed almost exactly." David released a slow breath. "So the marina is being built on your private property." Before either man could say another word, Victoria's SUV pulled into the driveway. She stepped out with 2 HOA board members and an envelope in her hand. Without greeting anyone, she handed it to David. He opened it. Inside was an official HOA violation notice. Unauthorized interference with an approved community improvement project. Fine, $25,000. Failure to pay within 10 days would result in legal action and additional penalties. Sarah looked at the notice in disbelief. "They're fighting us for protecting our own property?" Victoria smiled politely, loud enough for the watching neighbors to hear. "The rules apply equally to everyone." David folded the notice and slipped it back into the envelope. "You're making a very expensive mistake." Victoria gave a short laugh. "No, David." She turned toward the crowd. "You are?" As her SUV drove away, one elderly neighbor quietly approached David. He glanced over his shoulder to make sure no one was watching. Then he slipped a small flash drive into David's hand. "I think you need to see what's on this," he whispered. David looked down at the drive, confused. "What is it?" The neighbor swallowed hard. "Proof that someone at the HOA has been lying from the very beginning." David stared at the tiny flash drive. He had no idea what it contained. But before the sun set, that single piece of evidence would send him to an attorney and uncover a secret that could bring the entire HOA board crashing down. David turned the small flash drive over in his hand as he and Sarah walked back into the house. "What do you think is on it?" Sarah asked. David shook his head. "There's only one way to find out." They plugged the drive into David's laptop. Inside were dozens of files, meeting minutes, scanned emails, construction plans, and several videos recorded during closed-door HOA board meetings. One video immediately caught David's attention. The recording showed Victoria Langford standing at the front of the HOA conference room. "The Carter deed doesn't matter," she said confidently. "Once construction starts, he'll never have enough money to stop us." A board member looked uneasy. "But our attorney said ownership hasn't been verified." Victoria leaned across the table. By the time anyone questions it, the marina will already be finished. The room fell silent. Sarah looked at David. She knew. David nodded slowly. She knew from the beginning. The next morning, David and Sarah met attorney Michael Bennett. Michael spent nearly 2 hours reviewing the flash drive, the original deeds, the county maps, and the survey report. Finally, he removed his glasses. This changes everything. David leaned forward. How bad is it? For the HOA? Michael smiled for the first time. Very bad. He pointed to one email on the screen. This construction approval references survey maps that don't match the county's archive records. He opened another document. And these signatures? What about them? David asked. They don't match. Sarah frowned. You mean they're forged? Michael nodded. I can't prove it yet. He closed the folder. But I know exactly where to start. That afternoon, Michael filed an emergency demand for all HOA construction records. Within hours, Victoria received the notice. She stormed into the HOA office. Who leaked those files? She demanded. No one answered. She slammed her hand onto the conference table. I asked a question. Board Treasurer Alan Pierce nervously adjusted his tie. Maybe it's just a fishing expedition. Victoria stared at him. It won't stay that way if someone talks. Her warning hung heavily over the room. For the first time, several board members looked genuinely afraid. 2 days later, Officer Rebecca Morales arrived at David's property. We received another complaint, she said. What kind this time? David asked. Anonymous caller claims you're threatening construction workers. David looked surprised. I haven't spoken to anyone since Monday. Officer Morales nodded. I figured as much. She spent the next 30 minutes speaking with workers, neighbors, and the site supervisor. Every statement supported David's version of events. As she prepared to leave, one worker quietly approached her patrol car. I don't want my name involved, he whispered. Officer Morales listened carefully. The worker handed her several printed emails. I think these belong in your investigation. She thanked him and placed the documents into an evidence envelope. Meanwhile, construction continued. Floating docks were installed. Luxury boat slips took shape. A massive clubhouse began rising along David's shoreline. Each passing day made the illegal project more expensive. Victoria proudly gave interviews to local reporters. This marina will become the crown jewel of our community, she declared. Watching from across the road, David remained calm. Michael noticed. You don't seem worried. I've learned something in life, David replied. When someone keeps building on a bad foundation, the collapse only gets bigger. Michael smiled. I hope you're right. So do I. 3 days later, Michael received an unexpected phone call from the county archives office. We found something, the archivist said. What is it? A handwritten easement agreement from 1968. Michael's eyes widened. Is it signed? Yes. By whom? The county and David Carter's grandfather. Michael immediately drove to the archives. Inside a sealed records box was a yellowed engineering document showing that the Carter family retained permanent legal control over the lake's original drainage system for flood management. The agreement had never been canceled. It was still legally enforceable. Michael carefully closed the file. He reached for his phone. David, he said, unable to hide his excitement. I think we just found the document that changes this entire case. David stood silently on his porch overlooking the marina. What did you find? Michael took a deep breath. A legal right no one remembered. David looked toward the calm waters stretching across the lake. Then toward the expensive marina built without his permission. What exactly are you saying? Michael answered carefully. I'm saying the law still recognizes your family's authority over the historic water control system. David's expression remained steady. If that's true, it is. David looked across the lake one more time. A slow breeze rippled the water beneath the brand new docks. Neither man said another word, because they both understood what that forgotten document could mean. And if the engineering reports confirmed it, Victoria Langford's $5 million marina was standing on borrowed time. David barely slept that night. The newly discovered easement sat on his kitchen table beside the original property deed. Attorney Michael Bennett had already verified its authenticity with the county archives and an independent engineering firm. The next morning, David, Michael, and 2 county engineers met beside the old concrete water control structure hidden beneath thick brush at the far end of the lake. One engineer brushed decades of dirt from a weathered steel plaque. "It's exactly as the records describe," he said. "This flood control gate is still operational, and the easement gives the Carter family the legal authority to operate it for water management." David looked at Michael. "If I open it, I stay within the law?" Michael answered carefully. "As long as you follow the engineer's written recommendations and the county procedures, yes. This isn't revenge. It's the lawful operation of a historic drainage system." David nodded. "Then let's do it the right way." That evening, under county supervision, the engineer slowly opened the aging control gate. Water rushed into the old drainage channel that had been designed decades earlier to protect nearby farmland during heavy floods. Hour after hour, the lake level dropped. By sunrise, the luxurious marina no longer floated. Boats rested awkwardly in thick mud. Floating docks tilted at strange angles. Residents rushed outside in disbelief as news helicopters circled overhead. Victoria Langford arrived moments later. "This is sabotage," she shouted. Officer Rebecca Morales stepped between Victoria and David. "The county has confirmed the drainage was legally authorized." Victoria's face turned pale. "That's impossible." Michael handed her a copy of the easement. "It became possible in 1968. Within hours, television crews filled the neighborhood. Residents who had once praised the marina now demanded answers. One homeowner confronted Victoria. "You told us every permit had been verified." Another added, "You raised our HOA fees to pay for this." Victoria insisted the project had been properly approved, but confidence in her leadership was collapsing. Then another surprise arrived. Former HOA board member Thomas Reed voluntarily walked into Officer Morales' temporary command post. "I need to make a statement," he said quietly. Thomas admitted that months earlier, he had questioned the legality of the marina project. When he refused to vote in favor of altered property records, Victoria pressured him to resign. "I should have spoken sooner," he said, "but I couldn't keep living with it." His testimony matched the deleted emails recovered from the flash drive. A county financial audit followed. Investigators discovered unauthorized payments, altered invoices, and construction contracts approved before ownership had ever been confirmed. Several board members claimed they had relied entirely on Victoria's assurances. The evidence continued to grow. When the civil trial finally began, the courtroom was filled with residents, reporters, and former HOA members. Victoria's attorney argued that David had intentionally destroyed valuable community property. Michael Bennett stood and calmly addressed the court. "Your Honor, the plaintiff's argument assumes the marina was legally built. The evidence will show it was not." Judge Eleanor Brooks listened carefully as surveyors, engineers, county officials, and Officer Morales testified. Then Michael presented the original deed, the 1968 drainage easement, certified survey maps, the recovered emails, and the recorded HOA meeting. The courtroom became silent as Victoria's own voice played through the speakers. "The Carter deed doesn't matter. Once construction starts, he'll never have enough money to stop us." Judge Brooks looked directly at Victoria. "Did you make that statement?" Victoria hesitated. "Yes. And were you aware that ownership of the lake remained disputed at that time?" She lowered her eyes. "Yes." That single admission changed everything. Several days later, Judge Brooks delivered her ruling. "The court finds that the marina was constructed on privately owned property without lawful authorization. Mr. David Carter acted within his legal rights under a valid and enforceable drainage easement. Responsibility for the resulting financial losses rests with those who approved and authorized the unlawful construction." The courtroom remained quiet for a moment. Then David reached for Sarah's hand. Years of uncertainty finally lifted from his shoulders. Outside, residents gathered as Victoria Langford resigned from the HOA presidency. The remaining board members voted to cooperate fully with investigators and scheduled a new community election. Over the following months, the illegal marina was dismantled. The shoreline was restored, native trees were replanted, and the neighborhood slowly regained the trust it had lost. One evening, David stood once again on his old wooden dock. The lake reflected the orange colors of the setting sun, just as it had for decades. Sarah smiled. "It finally feels peaceful again." David nodded. "It was never about winning." She looked at him. "What was it about?" He watched the gentle ripples move across the water. "Protecting what was rightfully ours, and proving that the truth is stronger than power." The community never forgot what had happened. And neither did the people who learned the hard way that forged documents and empty promises can never outweigh honest evidence. Moral: truth eventually finds a voice. Asterisk: if you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if an HOA built on your private property?